Great. Hello, everyone. I can't see any of you because the lights are too bright, but that's fine. So I'm looking for a clicker. Let's see. So my talk today is going to be about how crypto assets mature. Really speaking on the subject of staking as growth infrastructure. We've seen an enormous amount of change in the past few months, in the couple years, and sort of like diving into where we think protocols are going today and what we sort of can expect and how we sort of like turbocharge that. I think a big piece to sort of start out here by mentioning is, the previous speaker spoke a little bit. We've had an enormous regulatory change in how we think about protocols and tokens and what we can build. And what that has meant is that we can start to think of protocols a little bit differently than we used to think about them. Hello? Can I just use one or other? This one? Does that work? Yeah, you hear me? Okay, great. That's better. That's better. So we've basically seen a really large change in the industry on what we can do. And when we think about things like the Genius legislation and the market structure legislation, what we're looking at is a world in the future where value is starting to converge in organizations, right? So we've started with a lot of things like protocols, which we necessarily have seen as really distinct and separate from corporations. But what I think we're going to start seeing is that these things are going to start to merge, right? We're entering a world where, as we deal with questions around what are securities, what are we allowed to do with tokens, how are these representing one another, we are starting to see a world where these things not only converge, but I would actually go so far as to say that tokens are kind of be the future operational building block of all corporations, all organizations, period. So I think that sort of is useful to understand, basically where I am coming at this from, where I'm starting to think about this from. And there's a lot of infrastructure that has sort of traditionally existed in the sort of equities, securities kind of world that is going to be very different in the tokenized world, but which is being built now. So let's sort of set the groundwork here, right? So we'll start with sort of like the token paradox, right? Like right now, what we've been forced to do over the past 4 years is build these organizations that have tokens, but tokens haven't really meant something, right? In our minds, they kind of mean something. We have an idea of what they are, but the administration had forced us into really sort of seeing them as things like meme coins, right? Which obviously has perpetuated kind of an unhealthy relationship with the token markets, right? And what we have from that is that if you have these tokens that are launched without some sort of incentive system, some sort of system by which these devices capture some sort of value, or they're related to some sort of value to the organization underneath that has created them, they aren't really valuable assets, right? Like the era of meme speculation, or just speculation in general, may be over. As we sort of move towards this convergence, we have to start thinking about protocols as real businesses. And indeed, protocols are real businesses. They make a lot of money. I mean, some of them, not all of them, of course. But if you look at the fee switch proposal from Hayden for Uniswap, we start to see what does it mean to have an organization that historically has just been on-chain, a protocol, but has done $4 trillion worth of value. What happens when that value starts to be captured by the protocol and by the token itself, right? So highlight here, of course, is that when tokens don't capture any value, or they don't have any purpose, or they don't do anything meaningful, you run into a lot of these kind of issues where as this token sort of gradually goes to zero, you have these things like treasury spending becomes a countdown to irrelevance. It's sort of this sort of form of just dilution, where you're just sort of spending this sort of reserve of money that you've built. Governance participants who may be operating your protocol, they don't necessarily have any skin in the game, or there's no sort of mechanism by which their actions sort of reflect economically on their participation. And as a note, this is a really interesting part coming with the market structure bill, TBD what actually gets passed in the end. But one of the things that it looks like is going to be very relevant here is whether or not you can have a token that's not a security without having some form of decentralized governance, right? And that's the big sort of question that a lot of things hinge on right now. And then, of course, institutional capital stays on the sidelines, right? Because they're looking for productive assets, right? They're not just looking for voting rights or means. I think voting rights are pretty important. There's a typo there. But they aren't looking for pure speculation. They're looking to say, oh, I would like to invest in Uniswap. I would like to have exposure to the value that Uniswap creates, or this proposal, this proposal will drive greater value back to token holders, right? So you can start to see how this future world where tokens and equity and corporations and protocols, they're actually starting to merge into like a future where, in my personal opinion, tokens are going to be the programmable way of operating organizations for the future. So when we think about staking, and the sort of title of this is Staking as Growth Infrastructure, staking really transforms our sort of legacy of governance tokens into productive assets. And it's kind of interesting that, we've been playing on this line of like, governance tokens. When you think about like traditional corporations and you think about traditional equities, well, actually there's a lot of governance that happens in the equity world as well. Sure, a lot of people maybe have it in their 401k and they're not necessarily voting themselves, but there is a lot of governance there too, right? There's some other aspects about equities I won't get into too much here because I'll probably run out of time. But when we think about tokens and protocols in particular, what we're looking to do is transform these tokens, these assets, into something productive that has value, right? And you want this economic sustainability so that protocols continue to grow, right? If you have something, a company, and it's valueless and creates no value, it's going to zero. The same thing as if you launch something on Pump.Fun, right? Somehow, this protocol needs to capture value. Pump.Fun, of course, captures a lot of value, but do the things that are launched on Pump.Fun capture value? Right, here's a great quote from Alex over at Matter Labs. For decentralization to persist, it must be economically sustainable. And this is a really key part here, right? We love decentralization because it's important. We've had values. We've spent like the past 10 years talking about our values, blah, 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 blah. But the truth really here is that it does need to be economically sustainable, right? Because a lot of these things require some sort of inputs. It has to be effectively a real business. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how staking drives protocol growth. And, it's worth noting that it has been, the SEC has said, staking is not a security. This is very important, right? And this is very interesting. I think we'll get, I think the government's going to revisit this a lot and probably add a little bit more clarity to all these aspects. But staking, I'm not going to say what it looks like up here on stage in other terms. There's a really heated debate on Twitter right now going on with some ex-industry officials that probably draws a little bit more attention to things that we talk about here today, so I won't get too much into it, but I think you can imagine. Let's talk a little bit about this, right? How does staking drive protocol growth? And I think it's worthwhile for a moment to think, what is staking? Because the staking that I'm talking about generally is a little bit different than the staking you might be directly thinking about, but it's very similar, right? Staking essentially is putting your financial assets towards some sort of productive activity that's required to sustain this network and being rewarded for the work that you've done, right? And in different networks that looks differently, but it's a key portion, if you look at the L1 world, to transitioning away from using things like proof of work. But even in the non-L1 world, where we're talking about things like DeFi protocols, it's very important for driving productive participation. So the two things I'm going to go over here are incentive alignment and infrastructure, like reducing the friction on your infrastructure. So the first one is incentive alignment, that it compounds over time. What this means is that you have a large base of token holders, and historically with protocols, your token holders are not just investors, but they're also users, they're also your go-to-market, they're also your BD. If you look at teams like Hyperliquid and the Hyperliquid airdrop, a big part of the success of Hyperliquid is that their token holders are their users, they are their advocates, they are their go-to-market, they are their BD, they are their builders, they're their like ecosystem itself, right? Many people who received Hyperliquid airdrop have gone on to build businesses on top of Hyperliquid. They are philosophically aligned, if not loyal to this platform, right? Now, there's a little bit of a special incentive mechanism loop that's happening there in particular, but it's important that they've tied participating in the ecosystem to their own success, right? So one of the things that you can do here with staking that's very important is you can reward productive participation, right? So you can ask of people, in order to receive rewards, we need X from you. That can be capital, that can be resources, that can be participation in operation, right? Historically, when we look at governance, governance is part of the process of deciding how to operate this protocol. When you look at teams like Aave or Compound, they rely upon their token holders, they rely upon their participants to help direct the safety and operation of their protocol. Part of that is really being able to say, hey, we are in fact decentralized. You are in fact safe or safer from the danger of centralized operators making decisions that might not make sense. Other pieces here is token holders can receive returns proportional to protocol success and their own efforts. One of the other mechanisms that exists right now in the ecosystem that are quite popular is buyback and burn. And buyback and burn is a very interesting mechanism. I have a number of issues with it. I'm just going to gloss over the high-level issue. But buyback and burn is really undirected rewards for somehow being in an ecosystem. But it's not directed rewards for participation, right? You can have a large number of token holders out there who are being effectively compensated by this reduction in supply by a buyback and burn mechanism, but you don't have to actually do anything. So you have this enormous freeloader problem. You've essentially just distributed value widely, but without making any sort of requirements on what participants have to do other than just hold a token. And in my opinion, certainly, that's pretty negative. Now, there's a lot of tax stories that may drive some people to choose that, but what you don't have is you don't have the ability to directly say to token holders, we need X from you, whether it's liquidity, participation, governance, review, X, Y, and Z. You don't have the ability to really direct rewards to the participants of your ecosystem that drive growth, right? So this is a key value that staking can bring to your protocol, which is you can direct incentives towards productive participation. Only those individuals and groups that drive value receive rewards proportional to that value that they help drive, right? You create an incentive loop for success, right? That doesn't exist in buyback and burn. We can all generally be happy our token price goes up and we can sell when we want to leave, but there isn't a direct connection between the value that I bring to this network and the value that I receive from it, right? Revenue flows to participants, not into treasury black holes. This is an important part. Teams have treasuries. Once money goes into decentralized protocol treasuries, it is exceptionally difficult to get it out, right? It is very hard to get it out. And while it's nice to say we have this giant treasury and it's this value, blah, 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 historically, if we look across DeFi, what we see is that treasuries just languish, lose value, they go down with the rest of the protocol. It's not going to directed, useful participation or action. So the other part, I think maybe I've spoken a little bit about this, but infrastructure that eliminates friction, right? Tally has built a staking protocol, which we'll get to. Hopefully I don't run out of time. Tally has built a staking protocol that specifically preserves voting power while generating returns for token holders. This is important. You can have an asset that is productive. The productivity is based on your efforts. You directly can participate still and operate this protocol, right? These things aren't being locked up into these obscure containers. You can attract institutional capital by offering these productive assets, right? So you can say, hey, now institution X, if you do Y, or you delegate the responsibility to do Y, you have access to this share of revenue based on these efforts, right? So you can make very interesting productive assets. So you have something that is competitive with the use of capital. Because we have to be honest, at scale, or anyone who any rational actor needs to know that holding one asset is a choice that you have to make, and you have to compare against all the other value that you could potentially use with this, get from this asset while you're holding, right? So there's an important trade-off that larger holders have to deal with. Enables multiple revenue sources. Protocols earn revenue from many different places, right? If you look at Uniswap, just to use an example, they have fees, but they also have an L2 which generates fees. There are many different ways that protocols can earn revenue, the same way corporations have many different sources of revenue. Staking can actually be used to support all those different sources of revenue, right? So things like validator compensation, DeFi liquidity incentives, eligibility. One of the things that Tally has built is actually an LST wrapper for efficient tax structuring. So you can get that tax advantage that you would have with something like a buyback and burn with the directed value that you get with something like staking. With some Case studies here from the Tally protocol, right? Obel, one of our flagship teams that use staking, they use it for their system. They are a distributed validator. They're extremely successful. They have a protocol that requires the operation by the participants in order to keep it safe. So they have 29% APY based on their own token, auto compounding, no lockups, maintain liquidity, and it's composable. So you can use it inside of DeFi. I'm going a little bit into the shilling part of this right now, so as you can tell. Another case study, ZK Sync. This was just announced a week or two ago. ZK Sync is building on top of the Tally protocol for staking to basically update their tokenomics as they move from a purely governance token framework to a governance utility token framework. This has been enormously successful, considering where the market has been in the past couple of weeks. You can see it reflected on the market's appetite for this asset. This idea that they can participate in the long-term success of the ZK Sync network and Providium and the other exciting things that ZK Sync is building. It's a part of their larger tokenomics upgrade. And that number, by the way, is like the day of that horrible crash, right? So, the market recognizes the value that the opportunity brings. So reward your token holders and drive protocol growth with Tally. So this is the unabashedly, shilling section. Tally has built a protocol that allows you to add staking to your DeFi project, to your AMM, to your system that you already have. This is what we believe is the next step in allowing tokens to be composable, valuable assets that holders want to hold and use and participate to drive growth. We have a number of different solutions here. You can use multiple reward mechanisms. We have the full governance integration. If you know us, you know that we started as a governance tool. We have since expanded to be the entire life cycle of supporting tokens from ICO, airdrop onwards. The value return mechanism, there's another word for this in the traditional world that I won't mention up here on stage, but this is a really key part to what we see as the functioning and survivability and the real growth of protocols. So we have a liquid staking version for DeFi composability. There's a lot of flexible eligibility tools that we've built in here. For example, you can score participants based on things like KYC, based on participation, based on different levels of how people participate. And this is actually ways that you can grade and drive really specific incentives and growth for your protocol. This is the kind of tooling that we believe is really necessary for driving institutional scale adoption, right? If you look at Tally today, over $40 or $50 billion is managed through the platform. Over $1 billion in value has been transferred through the platform. And all these protocols on Tally look very much like the corporation of tomorrow, right? This is the tooling that we build and the type of organizations that we work with. Protocols deploying with real capital and battle-tested systems create gravitational pull for tomorrow's institutional adoption. This is more true today than ever. This is like a big part of the Tally's vision where protocols can't just live on-chain in the sense that they can't just be part of DeFi. They also have to be a key part of TradFi, right? If you look at today, you cannot have a successful long-term protocol without having some sort of plan for our institutional participation. And it's not just because this past bull run we haven't seen the return of retail, but because tokens, blockchain fundamentally are an important part to the future of all money and value systems, and institutional adoption is really key to how your protocol succeeds, right? If you don't have a path towards that, you're gonna have a very difficult time. Running out of time here. The protocol's economics either sustain independence or require external support. We can take this in a number of different ways here, but you have to really think about how are you going to make sure that your protocol lives for a long time and generates value, right? So when a lot of people are responding lately to, Hayden and the Uniswap proposal, but this is a key part to the long-term sustainability of Uniswap. If you noticed, one of the things that they are giving up, Labs is giving up front-end fees, they're giving up all the sort of fee capture that they did at the top level, and they're capturing it all on the protocol level. Now, they're using buyback and burn, I have some issues with that, but they are still leaning into the vision of what these productive valuable tokens are. Oh, I made it just in time, 20 seconds left. Perfect, so my name is Dennison Bertram. I am building Tally. We have been around for a little over 5 years now. We power some of the largest teams in the space: Uniswap, ZK Sync, Arbitrum, Wormhole, about 500 others. We would love to partner with you and help you build out your infrastructure for your token, from ICO, TG, airdrop, governance, compliance, staking, and all the rest. So here's our QR code. Please reach out. We're doing a number of events this week as well. You can come by. We have a token launch summit, I think Monday. You should be able to find everything on this link or on our Twitter. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dennison. Thank you. So actually, your case study is quite interesting because the ZK Sync pump, I also saw that. So
yeah, it's nice.
Thank you. So, yep, do you want to ask someone questions, or anyone has any questions for him?
Question. Can't see anybody.
Yeah, even I. So it's okay. Okay. Oh, you have it?
Oh, wait, there's one. All right, back there. The handsome gentleman.
This. Do you have an opinion on wrapping 80-20 liquidity pools for staking? Let's say, for example, staked OBOL, if you take it as an example, make it an 80 OBOL, 20 ETH balancer LP, and then stake that for the rewards. Do you think that's a good idea, or is that just unnecessary extra yield for extra risk, maybe?
Well, I think yield is related to risk. You should be allowed to, you should be allowed to go as risky as you want. Obviously, we have to take into account like anything that might damage the underlying safety of the entire system. But in my opinion, it's your asset. If you want to do something wild with your asset, that should be your right. The way Tally has built its staking protocol, there is a bit of isolation of risk there in terms of like governance and decision making. So you're a little bit safer to use that, right? We sort of like specifically have built it so that governance and participation rights have been like split away from the economic financial value and rights. And that's very important. So that allows you to be a little bit more risky with your asset. So in general, I don't think it's our job to tell you what sort of risk is acceptable, because then I think most people would look at crypto in general and be like, well, is that risk acceptable, right? So hopefully that answers your question. Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.